Welcome back to our discussion of the U.S. Constitution. I'm Larry Schweikart, co-author of A Patriot's History of the United States and founder of Wild World of History at www.wildworldofhistory.com. I'm going to be taking a look at Article 5, which is the Amendments Clause in the U.S. Constitution. You know, perhaps other than the Freedom of Religion Clause in the First Amendment, very little in the U.S. Constitution generates as much discussion and controversy as the Amendments Clause, especially because of the Constitutional Convention that can be called the Special Convention or the Article 5 Convention. So we're going to take a look at that. Amending the U.S. Constitution has never been easy. It's been attempted 33 times, and 27 of those have been successful. The last, the 27th Amendment, became law in 1992, which prohibited members of Congress from granting themselves pay raises during current sessions of Congress. Article 5 enables the Constitution to be amended, then ratified through the actions of two-thirds of the members of each House of Congress, then sent to the states, where it must be ratified by three-fourths of the states. This is a very, very high bar. There's a second, more controversial means to amend the U.S. Constitution, and that is through a special Article 5 convention or a constitutional convention, today generally called a con-con. If two-thirds of the U.S. House and Senate legislatures propose such a con-con, one must be called by the U.S. Congress. Any amendment or legislation it passes must be ratified by three-fourths of the states. So let's read the actual text of Article 5. The Congress, whenever two-thirds of both houses shall deem it necessary, shall propose amendments to this Constitution, or, on the application of the legislatures of two-thirds of the several states, shall call a convention for proposing amendments, which, in either case, shall be valid to all intents and purposes as part of this Constitution, when ratified by the legislatures of three-fourths of the several states, or by conventions in three-fourths thereof, as one or the other mode of ratification may be proposed by the Congress, provided that no amendment shall be made prior to the year 1808, shall any manner affect the first and fourth clauses in the 9th section of the first article, and that no state, without its consent, shall be deprived of its equal suffrage in the Senate. That's a really long article. But what does that say? It says, basically, there's two ways of proposing amendments to the U.S. Constitution. One is to start in the U.S. Congress with two-thirds of the House, two-thirds of the Senate. The other is through one of these constitutional conventions. Either way, three-fourths of the state legislatures have to ratify this for it to become a law. And then it goes on to say that you can't violate the 1808 slave trade clause. Why? Because that was one of the means by which a compromise was reached that allowed the original Constitution to come into being. So you can't go back and say, well, this appeared only because of this clause, but now we're going to get rid of that clause. You can't do that. And the other is that you cannot, quote, deprive any state without its consent of its equal suffrage in the Senate. And of course, no state's going to do that, but you could say, we're going to strip you of your two senators. And no state's going to approve that. Now, the need for amendments in the U.S. Constitution was apparent before the Constitution was even ratified. Many of the states thought there were insufficient safeguards for the people and for the states against the federal government in the Constitution as it came out of the Convention. This will be discussed separately when I discuss the Bill of Rights. Needless to say, the founders designed a Bill of Rights, 10 amendments that strengthened protections against the national government's tyranny. And again, many found even these additional safeguards insufficient to protect the people. One of the fiercest critics of the original Constitution was a woman named Mercy Otis Warren, sister of James Otis, one of the Revolutionary founders, who wrote her Observations on a New Constitution and on the Federal and State Conventions in 1788 in the form of a pamphlet to help shape the Bill of Rights. We'll discuss her concerns also in a segment on the Bill of Rights. In 1792, Congress amended the Constitution already, this time regarding the judicial power. It said, quote, "The judicial power of the United States shall not be construed to extend to any suit in law or equity commenced or prosecuted against one of the United States by citizens of another state or by citizens or subjects of any foreign state." This one passed mainly because individuals relied on Article 3 to sue several states for debts. For example, in the case Chisholm v. Georgia, decided by the Supreme Court in 1793, this afforded states, for the most part, immunity against writs, even by a state's own citizens. In 1803, another glitch in the Constitution was discovered and fixed with the 12th Amendment. Originally, it was thought that presidential electors would cast two votes, one for their real candidate for president and then one for a favorite son from their own state. But they cast two votes for president, not a vote for a president and one for a vice president. What happened? Well, what happened was we ended up with a president and vice president of totally different parties who totally disagreed with each other. You had John Adams president and Thomas Jefferson vice president. So this had to be fixed, and it was fixed by the 12th Amendment, which required that electors vote for a president and vice president, one of whom shall not be an inhabitant of the state in which they live. Moreover, they had to name which person was to be president and which was to be vice president. 3 more amendments were passed after the Civil War regarding slavery. Then, the Income Tax Amendment in 1913 was passed, and so on. The most common approach to a con has been for it to address a single issue, such as a balanced budget amendment. It's not clear that this is actually possible. Some scholars say that it is, and that you can have a con only to address a single thing, like a balanced budget. Others think that this cannot happen, and that such a con cannot be limited in any way as to what the delegates would address once they got there. As of 2021, the Citizens for Self-Governance effort to call a con has passed 15 states with 19 needed. However, some legislatures have rescinded their prior applications. This occurred, for example, with the Equal Rights Amendment, where states began to rescind their prior approval. But even then, the language of Article 5 doesn't make clear if even this rescission is possible. Since 2016, 7 state legislatures rescinded their previous calls for a con. Since we have nowhere close to the representatives to call such a con, the official discussions by Congress as to what would be accepted really hasn't taken place. It's the same thing we discussed under the courts with the ripeness rule. They don't deal in hypotheticals, right? Some think that if the number is achieved, Congress must call a convention as the states requested it. It is a foregone conclusion that the states would have to sign onto the exact same language for such a convention. However, it is argued that none of the over 600 state constitutional conventions ever exceeded their scope. The opposing view to all this is that a con would be a runaway convention with rogue delegates. The first votes in the U.S. Constitutional Convention of 1787 were to hold all meetings in secret and to abolish the Articles of Confederation, which was expressly forbidden to the delegates. My argument on how this unfolds is somewhat simpler. If people cannot control their House of Representative members, if they cannot control their U.S. senators, if they cannot control their governors, if they cannot control their state House and Senate members, how in the world are you going to control the delegates to a convention? How would you ensure that, as in 1787, the first vote would not be to hold all of its meetings in secret? that the second vote wouldn't be to open it up to all amendments of all sorts. Moreover, the notion that the delegates to such a convention would be somehow purer than the current House or Senate members or governors seems rather dubious. Rather, experience has shown, to quote Thomas Jefferson, that those delegates, for the most part, would be the same exact people as who are governing you now. Given the fact that we are nowhere close to a needed number, the discussion remains purely academic. But we do have Article 5 in place if we ever choose to call a constitutional convention, or if you can persuade 2/3 of your congressmen and senators to vote in favor of a new amendment. And that's Article 5 of the U.S. Constitution. I'm Larry Schweikart, co-author of Patriots' History of the United States with Mike Allen, and founder of The Wild World of History, www.wildworldofhistory.com.